Every economics textbook tells you the same story. Print too much money and you get inflation. Pile up massive debt and your currency collapses. Ignore these rules and your economy dies. Japan has been ignoring these rules for 30 years. The Bank of Japan has printed more money than almost any central bank in history. Japan's debt is over 260% of GDP, the highest in the developed world. They've run near zero interest rates for decades. By every conventional measure, Japan should have collapsed into hyperinflation or currency crisis years ago, but it didn't. Instead, Japan fought deflation. Prices fell. The yen remained strong. And economists around the world have been scratching their heads trying to understand why the rules didn't apply. Tonight, we're going to trace Japan's entire monetary history, from the first coins struck over 2,300 years ago to the radical experiments happening right now. And you'll see that Japan's story isn't just about breaking rules. It's about what happens when a nation walks a tightrope between innovation and disaster. Because the lessons from Japan are both a warning and a blueprint for every modern economy facing the same choices. Let's begin at the very beginning. For most of ancient Japanese history, there was no money. Barter ruled. Rice, cloth, and tools were exchanged directly. But as Japan's contact with China grew during the 6th and 7th centuries, the imperial court realized that a unified currency could centralize power and facilitate trade. In 708 AD, Empress Genmai ordered the minting of Japan's first official currency, the Wado-kaichin. These were round copper coins with a square hole in the center, modeled directly on Chinese Tang Dynasty coins. The design was practical. Coins could be strung together on cords for easy transport and counting. For the first time, Japan had a standardized medium of exchange backed by imperial authority. But the system struggled. Minting coins required copper, and Japan's copper supplies were limited. The government tried to force adoption, requiring tax payments in coin, and penalizing those who refused to use it. Yet in rural areas, rice remained the preferred currency. Farmers didn't trust metal they couldn't eat, and local lords preferred the flexibility of rice-based taxation. Over the next few centuries, Japan minted several series of coins, but domestic production eventually collapsed. By the 10th century, official minting had stopped entirely. Why? The cost of producing coins exceeded their face value, and the government couldn't sustain the operation. Japan entered a long period where it imported Chinese coins instead of making its own. For nearly 600 years, from roughly 958 to 1608, Japan had no domestic currency production. Chinese copper cash circulated, but so did rice, gold dust, and various commodities. The monetary system was fragmented, regional, and remarkably unstable. This would change dramatically with the rise of the Tokugawa shogunate. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu unified Japan and established the Edo shogunate, which would rule for over 250 years. One of his first priorities was monetary reform. Japan needed a stable, unified currency to support the growing economy and consolidate political control. The Tokugawa government created a tri-metallic monetary system, one of the most complex in history. Gold coins, called koban, were used by samurai and merchants in urban centers. Silver coins circulated primarily in western Japan and for large commercial transactions. Copper and bronze coins handled everyday purchases among commoners. Here's where it gets interesting. These three metals didn't have fixed exchange rates. The value of gold relative to silver fluctuated, sometimes creating arbitrage opportunities for savvy merchants. Foreign traders, especially the Dutch and Chinese who were allowed limited access to Japan, exploited these discrepancies, draining Japan of precious metals. Despite these challenges, the system worked remarkably well for over 2 centuries. Japan enjoyed relative peace and economic growth. The population stabilized, agriculture improved, and a vibrant urban merchant class emerged. Rice continued to serve as a parallel currency. Samurai were paid stipends measured in koku, units of rice sufficient to feed one person for a year. But the Edo system had a fatal weakness. It depended on isolation. When Commodore Matthew Perry's American warships arrived in 1853, demanding Japan open to trade, the entire monetary structure was exposed as fragile and outdated. Japan's silver was undervalued compared to global markets, leading to massive outflows of precious metals once trade began. The shogunate's authority crumbled, and with it the old monetary order. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 overthrew the shogunate and restored imperial rule. The new government faced a daunting task: transform a feudal economy into a modern industrial nation capable of competing with Western powers. Monetary reform was essential. In 1871, the Meiji government introduced the yen, modeled on the decimal systems used in Europe and America. 1 yen was defined as 1.5 grams of gold, linking Japan to the international gold standard. The old clan currencies, rice stipends, and regional coins were abolished. For the first time in its history, Japan had a single, unified, modern currency. The transition wasn't smooth. The government issued inconvertible paper notes to fund industrialization and military expansion, leading to inflation in the 1870s. Finance Minister Matsukata Masayoshi implemented deflationary policies in the 1880s, raising taxes, cutting spending, and withdrawing paper money to stabilize the yen. It worked, but at a brutal social cost. Agricultural prices collapsed, farmers lost land, and rural unrest spiked. By the 1890s, Japan had stabilized the yen and returned to a credible gold standard. This allowed Japan to borrow internationally and fund rapid industrialization. Victories in the Sino-Japanese War, 1895, and Russo-Japanese War, 1905, demonstrated Japan's new strength and boosted confidence in the yen. For the next few decades, Japan's monetary system functioned much like those of Western powers, backed by gold, integrated into global trade, and supporting an expanding empire. But this stability was an illusion. The gold standard was rigid, and when global shocks hit, Japan's economy would prove dangerously vulnerable. The Great Depression shattered the global economic order. In 1931, Japan abandoned the gold standard to protect its reserves and stimulate the economy. This unleashed the government and military to pursue aggressive expansion in Asia, funded increasingly by money creation. Japan's invasion of China in 1937 and entry into World War II in 1941 required staggering resources. The government printed yen relentlessly to pay for weapons, soldiers, and supplies. Domestic production was redirected entirely toward the war effort. Consumer goods vanished, rationing became universal, and inflation began to creep upward. Then came defeat. In August 1945, Japan surrendered after atomic bombs destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The economy was in ruins. Factories were bombed, infrastructure shattered, and millions of soldiers and civilians flooded back into a country that couldn't feed or employ them. What followed was one of history's most dramatic episodes of hyperinflation. Between 1945 and 1949, prices in Japan rose roughly 100-fold. A bowl of rice that cost a few yen before the war cost hundreds afterward. Wages became meaningless overnight. The black market dominated, and cigarettes, rice, and American goods became more trusted than yen. The government tried everything. They issued new yen notes, imposed price controls, and froze bank deposits. Nothing worked. Confidence in the currency had evaporated. Japan's monetary system had collapsed as completely as its military. Salvation came from an unexpected source: the United States. Facing the onset of the Cold War and wanting a stable ally in Asia, America implemented the Dodge Plan in 1949, a harsh stabilization program that balanced Japan's budget, fixed the yen at 360 to the dollar, and cut government spending. It was painful, but it worked. By 1950, inflation was under control, and Japan's economy began its miraculous recovery. With stability restored, Japan entered the fastest period of economic growth in modern history. From the 1950s through the 1980s, Japan's GDP grew at an average of nearly 10% per year. Devastated cities were rebuilt. Industries like steel, automobiles, and electronics emerged as global leaders. Sony, Toyota, Honda, names that would dominate the world. The yen remained pegged at 360 to the dollar under the Bretton Woods system. This undervaluation made Japanese exports cheap and competitive, fueling the export boom. The government and Bank of Japan carefully managed credit, directing loans toward strategic industries. Japanese companies reinvested profits into expansion rather than dividends. Savings rates were extraordinarily high, providing capital for growth. By the 1980s, Japan was the world's second-largest economy. Japanese investors bought American real estate and companies. The yen had become a major global currency. There was talk of Japan surpassing the United States economically. But beneath the surface, imbalances were growing. Asset prices, especially real estate and stocks, had become detached from reality. The Nikkei stock index hit nearly 39,000 in December 1989. Tokyo land prices reached absurd levels. At one point, the grounds of the Imperial Palace were theoretically worth more than all of California. It was a bubble, and everyone in Japan was living inside it. When it popped, the consequences would define the next 3 decades. The bubble burst in 1990. Stock prices collapsed. Real estate values plummeted. Banks, which had lent aggressively against inflated assets, were suddenly holding mountains of bad debt. Companies and households, over-leveraged during the boom, were crushed. Japan entered a deflationary spiral. Prices began falling. Consumers delayed purchases, expecting things to get cheaper. Businesses cut spending. Unemployment rose. And the more prices fell, the more real debt burdens increased, choking growth further. The Bank of Japan cut interest rates to 0 by 1999, but it wasn't enough. Japan had hit the zero lower bound, the point where conventional monetary policy stops working. They couldn't cut rates below 0, at least not yet, and the economy remained stuck. So Japan tried something radical: quantitative easing. The Bank of Japan began buying government bonds, pumping money directly into the financial system. The theory was simple: flood the economy with cash and inflation would return. It didn't work. Japan printed trillions of yen. The monetary base exploded. Government debt soared past 200% of GDP, and inflation stayed near 0 or even negative for years. Economists called it the lost decade, then the lost 2 decades, then just stopped counting. Why didn't inflation return? Several reasons. Japanese households, scarred by the bubble's collapse, saved aggressively rather than spending. Demographics turned negative. Japan's population aged rapidly, reducing consumption and investment. Banks still cleaning up bad loans didn't lend aggressively. And crucially, almost all of Japan's debt was held domestically in yen by Japanese citizens. There was no external pressure on the currency. Japan had broken the rules. It printed money on a scale that should have caused hyperinflation. Instead, it fought deflation. The world watched, stunned and confused. In 2013, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe launched Abenomics, a bold attempt to finally escape deflation through massive fiscal stimulus, structural reforms, and unprecedented monetary easing. The Bank of Japan, under Governor Haruhiko Kuroda, doubled down. They bought not just government bonds, but corporate bonds, real estate trusts, even stock ETFs. Japan's central bank balance sheet ballooned to over 130% of GDP, by far the largest in the developed world. They pushed interest rates into negative territory. They promised to keep printing until inflation hit 2% and stayed there. And still, inflation barely budged. For years, it hovered near 0. Even global supply chain disruptions and energy shocks in 2021-2022 caused only modest price increases compared to the rest of the world. What makes Japan different? Culture plays a role. Japanese society values stability and saving over consumption. Demographics are critical. A shrinking, aging population structurally deflates demand. But the most important factor is debt ownership. Because Japanese debt is held domestically, in yen by Japanese institutions and citizens, there's no panic, no capital flight, no currency collapse. The Japanese people effectively owe money to themselves. This makes Japan's situation almost impossible to replicate. Other nations that print massive amounts of money face external creditors, capital flight, and currency devaluation. Japan doesn't because its creditors are its own citizens. But this comes at a cost. Growth has been anemic for 30 years. Living standards have stagnated. Young people face limited opportunities, and the debt keeps growing with no clear path to ever paying it down. Japan's monetary history is a story of constant reinvention, from ancient copper coins to feudal rice payments, from the modern yen's birth to the collapse after World War II. From miracle growth to the longest deflation in modern history, Japan has experienced nearly every monetary phenomenon possible. And the lesson? There are no universal rules. The conventional wisdom, that printing money always causes inflation, that debt always leads to crisis, doesn't apply uniformly. Context matters. Culture matters. Demographics matter. Who holds the debt matters. Japan survived what should have killed it because of unique circumstances that few other nations share. Its people saved rather than spent. Its debt was domestic. Its society valued stability over growth. These factors created a paradox. An economy that could print money endlessly without triggering the inflation that destroyed Rome, Weimar, Zimbabwe, and countless others. But survival isn't the same as thriving. Japan's lost decades are a warning, not a model. Stagnation, aging, and crushing debt may not cause immediate collapse, but they slowly drain a nation's vitality. Other countries looking at Japan's experience need to ask, can we replicate the stability without the stagnation? Can we print our way out of crisis without destroying our currency? Or will we discover too late that we lack the unique conditions that allowed Japan to break the rules? History doesn't repeat, but the laws of money bend differently depending on who's holding the currency. Japan proved that. The question is whether that proof offers hope or just delays the inevitable reckoning. If this changed how you see money and economics, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.